everyone. Here we go again with another session and another great session. I think this is going to be one of the best sessions. All of them have been really great. And why is this going to be such an interesting session? Essentially because it crosses the aerospace and blockchain and the potential of transformation that blockchain will have in the aerospace industry. And for that, we have invited Todd Siena. He's the founder and CEO of Block Aero Technologies. He's a known player in the market, and his experience talks for himself. I believe that he's going to talk a little bit about not just Block Aero, but his experience in aviation, as well as in other areas of his life, as well as his entrepreneurship life. And at the same time, we're going to discuss a little bit the challenges, the opportunities of the aerospace industry, and how this deep tech is changing profoundly the aerospace, and what are the next steps. So thank you very much, Todd. Thanks again for seeing you and for being with us on this session. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you for that. First of all, I'm the founder and CEO of Block Aero. So we're a aerospace blockchain technology company. We were founded about 5 years ago, 2017. I'm based currently here in Bangkok. So we're on the other side of the world from Portugal, but the travel has recently been opened up, and welcome everybody to experience the joys of international aviation as soon as you can. So first of all, I guess I need to say next slide. If I could have my presentation deck coming up, thank you very much. Let's go ahead to the next one. So let's stay on this one for a little bit. I want everybody to think about when they get on an aircraft, and generally speaking, as an industry, we're considered probably the safest industry in the world. If you just look at the pure numbers, the number of flight hours, the distance we move people, aviation is an extremely safe industry. And for that reason, we have very strict regulations in place to secure the entire supply chain and all the processes and people that keep the industry running. So the way that we would describe that is with these very high value assets, if we want to keep operating them, if we want to exchange them, when we manage them, we always have to prove a couple of things. I need to be able to say who owned this part, who operated it, was airworthiness, and airworthiness is an aviation lingo word for safety. Was airworthiness maintained throughout the life cycle? And how can I prove this? A very important phrase that we would use is back to birth. How can I prove the back to birth trace? Some people will call that provenance. And then more recently, and this is also, again, being driven by regulation, which I think is a kind of theme in our industry and in today's talk, is it sustainable? And all of these things and the problems and the challenges to prove them is exactly what blockchain can deliver to the aerospace industry. Next slide, please. So the nice thing about today's presentation is I know I have a bit of a theoretically interested audience, some students, some alumni, and maybe people that are just kind of interested in some of the market dynamics and things at play here. But we are, I guess, pre-COVID. If you take aerospace and defense, this is an $800 trillion industry, or $800 billion industry. If you add in the airlines and all the economic revenue around that, it's actually trillions of dollars. But quantifying just the losses that we experience as an industry, and I know most of you will think of aviation as the airline, but I want you to remember that this aircraft has many more stakeholders besides the airline. And these stakeholders all like have to collaborate, and the failures in those market transactions cause an estimated 70 plus $billion. And I've seen various large players in the industry. Personally, I was actually in management consulting of aviation in my immediate company before this one. Anywhere between 50 to 75 billion dollars, basically. Slide, please. So again, and this slide may help you understand it a little more. It's a kind of ecosystem. So when you get on an aircraft, there's really only 4 big players that make aircraft, and if it's a large aircraft, it goes down to 2, which is Airbus and Boeing. So our industry is kind of a dynamic where there's a lot of monopoly or duopoly or oligopoly competition throughout the entire value chain, not just with the Boeing and the Airbus, but there are many different players. And what happens is each of them, or each company even, will start to create these data silos, and the siloed environments really kind of cause a huge fragmentation where everybody is taking this very complex asset that has so much important status and data. And the way that we look at it is like, what does the PDF report say on, July 1st? It's not real time. It's not connected to anything. It's not even secure. And that's the norm for pretty much most businesses, and even ones with intensive traceability requirements. This is not only a kind of data integrity challenge, but it's also like a kind of loss in terms of just wasted work that gets done processing data. It's done multiple times, and then sometimes when it's done, it's just not even utilized later, so it's under monetized. So these are all huge problems, and they affect all these different players, and there's thousands of players. You can kind of relate, if you're familiar with an automotive industry, with like a tier of supply chain that also exists in the aviation industry. Slide, please. And I want to give you guys another idea of the scale. So you can think of aircraft, 20 million, a couple $100 million to get a brand new one. Even individual parts, like my family's business. Before I started, my own company, Aviatech, and then later Block Aero, I did sales in aircraft consumables and expendables. So we would make these kind of like electromechanical parts, assemble them in Florida, and we'd ship them out all around the world, whoever's fixing aircraft. I remember one time when I was like just getting started, I looked at this light bulb, and it was like a little small dingy light bulb. I was like, how much do we sell this thing? It's like $500 for this like little like thing that looks like you could buy it for less than $1 in China almost. And it's like, so it may not be that the material or whatever it's made of is actually expensive, but it's all the process and compliance around it that causes these things to be very expensive. And so when you think of these different scenarios, like the ones on this slide here that you might be reading, if anything, these numbers are somewhat understated. So billions of dollars in losses happen when planes cannot fly. Okay. And and if something even worse than that happens, that causes like a brand reputation loss, this is a serious problem. So I didn't talk too much about, I talked a lot about supply chain. I do want to say that leasing is another very important one to understand in the aviation industry. And I hope what I'm sharing about the industry, we're going to get a little more into blockchain in a moment, but I hope all of these industry points, if you have questions or thoughts about how they may relate to blockchain, please do feel free to drop a note in the chat. Professor can also, find some time to ask me questions as we go through this. So next slide, please. What I did want to say about the leasing company is most airlines that you fly on, they don't actually own their aircraft, which is very important to understand, because then you might get a better understanding of the reason for why do so many people care about how the parts are moving on and off of these aircraft. Well, it's because there's many different stakeholders. The leasing company also has a bank behind it and an insurance company, and the actual OEMs are quite hands-on with the assets they produce as well throughout the life cycle. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved here. Slide, please. Yeah, just some of the consultants saying how great blockchain is going to be for the aviation industry. I want to go past this one slide, please. Now let's talk about Block Aero. So the company that we founded and what we're bringing to the industry. So there are numerous use cases, and I'd be happy to explore in Q&A ideas or thoughts or questions about some specific ones. But generally speaking, what we help these companies in the aviation industry do, and not just necessarily as individual companies, but as small ecosystems, because they each have kind of clusters, you could say, of business partners that may be in an area and they do a lot of volume of transactions between each other. And so we help them to basically reform the old way of, PDF, email dependent processes where, the data, all this work you're doing is not creating any lasting value. But when you start to use blockchain to organize and structure this data, you begin to build up kind of what could be a single source of truth for transactions. So you can kind of reduce disputes. We help to streamline the delivery of these assets. And when I say an asset, I'm talking about an aircraft, but an engine or a part, anything that is a component of the aircraft is what our assets are at Block Aero that we help to digitize. And the transactions are what we can help to reduce in terms of the turnaround time and the speed. And this is because, again, by moving everything onto our distributed ledger platform, now the access and the transparency of the supply chain is visualized and shared to all of those stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. So that creates an efficiency, and plus being modern technology, we also drive a lot of just nice digital transformation benefits as well. Slide, please.
Would you say that it's mostly about turnaround cost reduction, or because I'm following a question here from Adam who's asking how can maintenance platforms reduce costs using blockchain? So is it mostly on optimizing time to deliver, or would you say that blockchain can actually provide a way to reduce costs?
Very good question, Adam. That's also my brother's name, and my brother happens to be the CTO of this company as well. Now, your question, I'm going to answer it with saying what are the priorities and what are the KPIs as well for these companies. So number one, which I think all of you should know, is safety. Okay, so we always put safety first in the aviation industry, and remember, safety is very closely related to compliance and regulatory compliance. Okay, so safety is very important. In the MRO business, you're very right to identify speed. Speed is extremely important. The amount of time that an asset sits either off wing in an unserviceable condition, or if an aircraft is what we would call AOG, aircraft on the ground, which a lot of aircraft are on the ground still today as we recover from the COVID pandemic extenuating circumstances that lasted years, and reliability. So the reliability one is where I would say, so one, yes, if you can lower your turnaround times, what people are struggling with today is throughput. There's not enough capacity now to meet the demand. And this was the case before COVID. It was shortly not the case during the crisis, and it's back again. The demand spike has already happened, and now the industry is in a very, very even worse kind of capacity limited status right now. So by reducing turnaround time, you are probably achieving that because you achieve some labor efficiencies, like man hours spent, and you probably also simplified some processes. And I think these things are all very important and would be among the top KPIs. But there are other KPIs that supply chain visibility and having better structured data and having better coordination of that data with your partners can bring, like avoiding very costly mistakes. So mistakes that could cause work stoppages or disruption in the production or an aircraft on the ground, anything like that. That is almost those are sort of like more impactful, but happen less frequently.
Okay, let's move on then, because I think you've got a full deck, and I'll continue with the
Yes.
questions.
We don't need to go through that whole deck, by the way. It's just in
Okay.
case we needed some more talking points. But please go to the next slide. Yeah. This is kind of to I want to share with you guys, as you're a business school and you probably think a lot about how would I, take these solutions to different industries. And what I want to explain to you is every industry, our industry. I'm in my late 30s now, so I'm like kind of a young guy for the industry in a way. Most industries probably are dominated by kind of a legacy and people that have a certain way of thinking, and I think there has to be this kind of handoff between generations where we can find the common points that we may agree on and build on that as a way to introduce new technologies. And I think a lot of times within our industry, discussing amongst ourselves, we do understand and recognize everything that we've put in place to achieve the high level of safety, whether or not the public understands that. Okay. And so because of that, we understand the importance of things like the standards and recommended practices, the fact that every maintenance record needs to be in a system that is immutable, or it has some way to be immutable. This is why we need blockchain. It's really the way to deliver that immutability on records management, which is critical for a very important piece of the aviation blockchain use case. And then we do need to move to a world where we recognize that things are getting more decentralized, more fragmented. It's not going to be a fully Amerocentric dominated world in the future. It's going to be an international world. And we need tools and systems like blockchain to help facilitate the implementation of these internationally agreed standards. Slide, please.
So would you say that the decentralization of data is at any time at risk, or at any security risk?
Yes, absolutely. So in the aerospace and defense industry, we have very restrictive regulations that make export control of data a very important priority for most of the players, especially the Western countries' aerospace and defense industries, but really all of them. Honestly, it's not limited to the West, but of course, being the legacy providers, there's a kind of a more like extensive regulatory framework around that. Blockchain should be the way that we actually achieve the appropriate balance, because what we face today is a world where geopolitical tensions are rising, and the knee jerk, or the easy reaction, I would say, for a large corporate that's in there is to be like kind of more conservative about sharing data, even if that data is something that should be shared. To be perfectly frank, some of them will be resistant to sharing, for example, like a kind of data that would help with the traceability of a part. And that shouldn't be the case. It should never be the case. And we should use blockchain to properly segment and then share the appropriate safety data, while not sharing what is mainly design data and other types of technical data that would fall under like ITAR and other export compliance regimes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. I put this one in here because I wanted to explain another industry. Like if you're thinking of being a guy who's going to go or woman who's going to go into, like the aerospace and defense industry or any other kind of industrial type of industry. Uh, you know, when I remember in 2017 when we launched, nobody even knew what blockchain was in the first year or two. Like most of the people we went in and talked with when we introduced our platform, uh, blockchain was like a huge curiosity or for some of them, but mostly just a complete unknown. And so like this was a way that I kind of tried to explain it to them in the early days, where it's kind of like I feel like the world is now kind of matured in its understanding. Although I think the way that we saw like in the last 12 months NFTs is that's still very immature way of thinking about how to use blockchain technology to encapsulate value of the physical world type of assets. But you know, we can proceed to the next slide. Yeah, so I think these are some. I'm not sure if it's blocked on the screen, but what I put here is like some advantages for the aviation community, and the immutability was one of the very important ones I mentioned earlier. Why? Standardization of data and portability of that data, and it's mainly data in the form of like certificates. We create certificates for everything, and we actually have certificate standards. But as you remember, I said most things are in PDF. A lot of things are unstructured, so there is very far from widespread adoption of data standards to like present something like a certificate of conformity, for example. So blockchain is inherently like bringing all participants on the network to be able to communicate on a common data standard. So that's something we've implemented at Block Aero, which is like kind of industry certification standards into the application. And then basically, we have a lot of rules and policies. It's kind of explaining how we use, in our case, we built on Hyperledger Fabric. So we can use like chain code to encode certain business rules and logic into the framework of our platform. And in an industry where you have many stakeholders, very high value assets, a lot at stake, you can imagine disputes can happen, and eliminating at least we weren't on the same page for what is the condition or status of this asset as a reason for dispute or the status of a transaction. That is another big advantage of blockchain for our industry. All right, slide.
Yeah,
Please.
this leads to another question from Miguel Carvalho, which he actually asks, how do you manage access restrictions to data from different stakeholders?
Again, that sounds like a very technical question. I don't know if that's a technical question in terms of like in Hyperledger Fabric and in our platform, how do we implement that? And I would say I'm not going to answer that question. But the way I would describe it from a user perspective is we at the chain code level, so at the blockchain level, we do implement on our like asset different roles, and those roles can connect to an organization. And so when I create an asset, I can assign different organizational roles to these different asset roles. Like I'm an owner, I'm an operator, I'm an asset manager, I'm the manufacturer. We made a kind of matrix for how we do the data sharing, and it's built around the principle of like you see effectively your own private commercial data. You can attach it to your asset, but nobody else can see that. But you could share the hash of the validity of some of those commercial documents and data that you might attach to the aviation asset. And then for the safety data, that automatically transfers whenever I exchange the organization on our blockchain aviation asset. And that's one of the really nice, I think, features of our platform in the long run. Because think about it, you have to have more transactions, and these are assets. I didn't talk about this yet, but like they're 20 to 40 years old. So they have a pretty long life cycle, and they'll experience. But you need to go through some years to experience all these transitions. And I believe the real benefit of blockchain is it is something that accrues over time. The magnitude of the benefit.
Okay.
Okay. We can skip this one. We don't have time to go on this. Ecosystem. I think this might have been the one I want. How are we doing on time, Professor?
We have enough time, so you can we can that's all good. We can all continue with the conversation and continue with the questions. We have about we're mixing questions with the presentation, so that's good. So we'll still have about half an hour, so that's fine.
Okay. Good. So like we can continue, and so let's talk about the ecosystem a bit more. Slide, please. Yeah. So essentially, I guess most people, of course, when we talk about blockchain, are thinking about public chains. So public open chains where anybody can download the Ethereum client or the Bitcoin client and become a miner. A miner, is kind of analogous to like a validator node on a private network, I guess. And for us, we don't use blockchain at all for the anonymity aspects of it. In fact, anonymity is the opposite of what we want in the aviation industry. We want everybody to be known, and we need to have certain KYC and credentialing processes to like maintain the integrity of our business networks. And so we reflect basically what an aviation business network would look like in the way that we have people join our platform and our network. ICAO is so International Civil Aviation Organization is effectively the United Nations specialized agency. So in the 1940s, at the end of after World War II, all the nations in the world kind of got together and they said, how are we going to create an international civil aviation system? And that was done in Chicago. It was called the Chicago Convention. And basically ICAO was formed to build up on that and like create the kind of seamless experience for the most part that we have flying an aircraft around the world. And so Block Aero, actually, we do have an official MOU partnership to do a number of kind of things, but especially on the humanitarian aspects of how we can bring blockchain to help aviation authorities to have more resilience in their emergency management systems. And it's one of our important programs that we have online today. Slide, please.
One question is from Adam again. Which airlines are currently using blockchain and which private partnerships have already been created?
Well, I mean, I think most airlines I would say most of the biggest airlines have probably done like at least one blockchain POC at this point. The only blockchain platform for the civil aviation industry that is in production today, as far as I know, is Block Aero. And, we were just recently brought into production in the last, not even 6 months. And our launch customer and investor is from the Japan Airlines Group. We have a number of other airlines that are all joining in as well this year. So I think it's going to be something that begins to grow rapidly, especially on the sustainable front. I believe we will start to see much widespread adoption from the airline side as we use blockchain to track carbon and this type of data with the aircraft and the fuel. All right, so I think we kind of did address this. There are many different players. All of these guys kind of interact with each other. I think we can go to the next slide, though. I'm not going to go through all these players. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about digital assets and how it works on the Block Aero platform, a little more deeper into the blockchain. And I think this kind of goes a little bit with the access control question earlier. This is still not even a comprehensive list of all the different role types that we have, but effectively, what you do is you log into Block Aero, and there's like an interface. You can do everything, of course, through APIs as well, but there's a very nice and simple interface where you can just basically create your fleet, and or you can create your inventory. There's part numbers, serial numbers, and then it gets serialized, and we create the digital asset on the platform as a kind of blank passport that can start to be filled with like events and documents and aviation data types. And basically, these are the kind of initial roles you might assign to your assets. Okay, next slide. So after we create these assets, we essentially have other, in Hyperledger Fabric, it's like you see, basically you have these kind of like unique records, and basically you can code different rules for how the different records can bind to, like, for example, our blockchain BAA, blockchain aviation asset. And so we put things like configuration, so like the installations and removals of parts, stakeholder management, that's what we just talked about, like who owns it, who operates it, and so on. Events, like, so you can build the full chain of custody and maintenance. It's of course very important for the airworthiness side. So next slide, please. One of the things that I think enterprises need to understand is they can use enterprise blockchain solutions, both public and private, I believe. And I'm not, by the way, against public blockchains anyway. I hope it didn't come across like that when I was talking about it earlier. I own some crypto myself, but I'm not really huge into that part of it. But I do believe that these worlds will increasingly merge together, including with Block Aero. But for enterprises, the way I think that they can start to understand why blockchain is valuable for them is by thinking about all of this work that they pay their people to do and invest in. And a lot of times it's just data that's getting created and never used again, really. There's so much data that's just wasted and repeated. And I think over time, if you start securing this data with a blockchain, you're like kind of creating this exponentially growing value of an asset instead of just cost that never gets recovered. Slide, please. Yeah, so this is basically another, I guess, saying about our Hyperledger Fabric being the framework that we use. We can move on to the next slide. I feel like I've talked about all these points already. Okay.
I have a question which relates to building the networks or building the, let's call it the alliance. This is something that is of interest because the success of building a consortium blockchain or a network of players that contribute their data and their assets traceability is very much dependent on the adoption as well as the traction that ecosystem generates. And one of the questions is how can you actively encourage all partners in the supply chain and MROs to embrace the evolution of blockchain? And how has it been? Because one thing is encouraging them, the other thing is actually um, having them really operating under the same roof. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I mean that's a if you can solve those problems for an entrepreneur, then especially in a network kind of business, then you've really you're going to have a multi-billion-dollar business. So obviously, we have our go-to-market strategy. I think I've shared some of the points about that. I think there's no one way or one answer for how to do that. I think there are some natural ideas that, from an investor perspective or just like an outside looking in kind of perspective, the first thing I think people do is like, well, what are the existing networks that are out there? And how do I
Mm-hmm.
tap those existing? Because networks already existed before blockchain, right? And so are you coming in with a solution to somebody who already has an existing network, or are you telling them we're going to build your network for you? So I think it's a little bit more the former. And then, for us, we're helping our customers put their deliveries on a blockchain and, put their repair orders on a blockchain. I think pretty much every aerospace company needs to do that. And we just want to have the best product and the best customer service and support to like achieve that kind of ambitious goal of supporting the entire industry. I believe working with governments and the OEMs is extremely important to achieving that at scale. And that good segue. This is why we put a lot of emphasis into investing into our partnership with ICAO. So it's very important to build these kind of partnerships for the question that was just asked. And honestly, we got this partnership because we did things that others were not willing to do. And I don't mean like bad things at all. I mean putting in a lot of work when there was nothing necessarily that could be seen to come out of it, and sticking with it, and of course building relationships and friendships. But um, you know in the end, like we get inspired by the sort of humanitarian side of what aviation does for the world, and it's our way as a company to keep our employees motivated and have something to do besides just the commercial and money making aspects of putting orders on a blockchain. Slide,
Mm-hmm.
please. And this is another one of, as I said, OEMs. Rolls-Royce is an OEM of engines. So you might think of them mainly as the car, but they're one of the largest players in civil aero engines. So we have a great relationship, and we still have many Rolls-Royce materials and assets flowing on our blockchain as of today. So this is a kind of, as you grow your startup kind of point, I think for the audience to understand, it's good to like seek out those POCs. There's, I think, a growing trend for open innovation challenges. I think that's something that you might want to look into, just to kind of like the best thing about these early POCs. And every company has a bit different journey. Enterprise, I feel like we had to invest a lot in the technology in the R&D stage to get something to a level that it can be, replacing these kind of very high scale. And in fact, this is one of one of the biggest barriers to working with corporates is they know that blockchain is a very non-scaling technology because they are referencing the public chains, which are not appropriate for like big volumes of data and like this kind of high frequency stuff that we're doing. Like even our own private blockchain, we have to be very smart. Our CTO and the team on that side has to really make sure that the performance is like staying at a level that's going to be satisfactory to enterprise demands. So working with large enterprises, POCs like this was very good in helping us to kind of like hone the product and make sure that we're addressing problem statements that the market needs end to end. Thank you. Next slide. This is another one. So we also, actually, blockchain makes a lot of sense with other technologies, AI, IoT, sustainable fuels, all of these kind of things. Blockchain plus. I think blockchain plus is something that you should think about. How do I combine something very, very like kind of specific but valuable use case that could like be completely transformed with like a sensor that then pushes that data onto the blockchain so that it's a real time blockchain connection. And that's basically what we're doing with some of the large players today. We're about to make, I hope in the next 2 weeks, we'll make an announcement on that. It's an exciting project combining our IoT with blockchain. This was a kind of early POC we did with Etihad Airways and Sanad. So the other thing is, don't restrict yourself to just, wherever you live. We went out and did these POCs in Singapore, in the United Arab Emirates, in Japan. So, it's time for us to do more, I guess, in Europe and the U.S. But I'll actually be out to Farnborough in Farnborough Air Show out nearby London in about 2 weeks' time from now. It's been 4 years, or it feels like 4 years since. It's been probably, I guess, 3 years since I did my normal Europe trip. I really look forward to going back there this summer. Slide, please. Yeah, join us. I don't know. I think I can pause here for a little while. Do we want to have a little Q&A? Any discussions?
Yeah, there are still some questions that I left open. Probably more open questions or more generic questions. So one of them is about integrating sectors, which makes a lot of sense because that's what you are actually already doing. Because some people say that Rolls-Royce is not in the aviation; it's more in the motor industry. Some will say that it's more in the aviation. Some will say, well, it's now they're not selling like GE. They're not selling any more motors. They're selling just quality of miles or air miles. So miles as a service. So and the question
Rolls-Royce
relates
actually pioneered that business model. We
exactly.
call it power by the hour.
Yeah, powered by the hour. So with that say, definitely blockchain is a technology that traverses multiple sectors, and this is where the question comes from. How did you find the ability to integrate and connect different sectors? And what would you say were the most challenging sectors to connect in terms of aviation?
Well, how I guess my background prior to starting this company helped a lot because I worked in management consulting for the aerospace industry, and just by the nature of that kind of business, I was able to, I would work with the investors and with all the different players in the ecosystem. So that made my realization of all those problems that I thought were bad enough when I'm dealing with, small kind of like assemblies and connectors on the aircraft, just got bigger and bigger as you get to like the full size, full aircraft. And so then, just literally by working with customers of different parts of the value chain, I learned more about their pain points over time. Then what was the professor? What was the second part of that question?
It's what are the challenges
Oh, the
and what are
hardest
the
one, right? It was like,
sectors?
what is the most
Yeah,
difficult player or something to?
exactly. Or the most difficult sector. Probably player is easy to identify, but sector is probably the hardest one because some
Well,
sectors may be very innovation prone, while others are more into, well, this has been done like we've done this all the time like this, and why would we need blockchain?
what I would say is, I won't answer the hardest one. I'll answer with the easiest one first, and maybe you can work backwards to the hardest one from that. But the easiest one is the people that deal with the biggest mess from all of this poor maintenance of the data, right? Which is the MRO, the maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and aftermarket people. So the people that want to monetize these parts later in the life cycle. The leasing companies also feel this pain a lot because they manage the assets until they get parted out, recycled. So if you look at it from that perspective, you could try to go all the way to the other side of the chain and maybe think that these are the players that might care less about it. But remember, those players also kind of want to own the whole life cycle in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'll answer it like that.
Okay. There's an interesting question here which relates to accidents, and maybe you've had many times this question, which is in the case of an accident, could an agency like FAA request this data in order to trace a faulty part, for example, and hold a specific company accountable?
Well, of course, each state or each country will have different regulators, and some of these states, like the United States, for example, will have a NTSB. So we have, in our industry, we have you need to have the oversight of the oversight, right? And this even needs to be within your own organization. So we call that like a safety management system, and so that principle is, there's the United States actually used to be considered the gold standard, and to be fair to the United States, we're still like the leaders in that space. But over time, other regulatory agencies like EASA and then CAC and others started to get more and more sophisticated, and so there's there are, of course, regulations for how to handle, these investigations, and of course, recovering these maintenance records is indeed within the rights of the civil aviation authorities of multiple states. So it could be the state that manufactured the aviation product, or it could be the state of design for that aviation product, or it could be the state of operator. So as you can see, there could be many states involved. This is why we need organizations like ICAO to harmonize regulation. And that's kind of their purpose, is to harmonize. We call them annexes. And within these annexes, there are rules that must be followed to recover that data. But is it a perfect system? As you can imagine, it's not. So, but it's a
Yeah.
fairly robust system that could be improved.
That leads to another question which was hanging in here, which was about data standards. And from your perspective, who should be responsible for these data standards? Should it be governmental, as you were saying, or should it be an international agency? And specifically for standards, data standards, and even security standards in terms of blockchain?
Industry will tend to come together to like originate data standards, right? The way I see it is that the industry typically will have various associations where data standards may be created. In the earliest days, the most famous one is ATA standard, Airlines for America. So the United States Airlines had their own trade associations, and they came up with some data standards that are very widely used today, like basically how you map out like an entire aircraft. So things like that. And then even further, sort of like more extensive types of information also have standards. As I mentioned earlier, we can all have these great standards, but it comes down to the implementation, right? And even if a software system that may have implemented this standard, might have slightly implemented it. Sometimes it's possible to implement it differently, you could say, across different systems. And
Sure.
so you got to do your best. And I think blockchain helps enforce a more rigorous implementation of these standards. Regulators, would say they can take from industry some of these kind of standards, and I've seen them do that within regulations. It's not that common that they come up with their own, except when it comes to things like certificates and forms, which you could consider as data types.
Hmm. Another question related to, and we talked a little bit about this, collaboration between governments and governmental and intergovernmental projects. So, could blockchain be used in intergovernmental projects? A good example is the TGV networks or cross-continental infrastructure projects. And what is your take on this?
Well, I would say that I frequently get asked if we can apply our platform to other industries like rolling stock or oil and gas, and we can, and I'm sure we will. Although we're mainly focused on aerospace at the moment. Um, I think we do have intergovernmental agencies. So, like for aviation, that is ICAO. do they have a role? Absolutely. They these intergovernmental agencies should have a role, not necessarily mandating one particular thing to do or one network that can monopolize something, but they should have their influence by where they participate, and I assume they'll participate in the blockchains networks that help to bring the industry into adopting their standards and recommended practices more. So that's I think so. I think it's unlikely that these intergovernmental organizations have the bandwidth or the capability or the resources to really implement kind of their own blockchain networks on their own. Like I don't like I would have a hard time seeing some of these organizations do that. So they got to cooperate with the private sector to some extent to achieve that.
Yeah, and this leads to the next question, which is a bit of I've got two provocative questions here before we go
Good.
into closure. But one is, can you guarantee transparency in PPPs? That's one. And the other one, why isn't blockchain scalable? Surely that is one of the advantages. And I beg to disagree on the scalability of blockchain, especially on the new protocols and even on new on the new networks. But I'll let you answer those questions.
Okay. You know, transparency. What is your definition of transparency? Would be the next question. Obviously, I'm a believer in transparency. So like you can Google ICAO Block Aero. You can learn a little bit about our projects. So there's transparency in that regard, but I agree, like there's also a lack of transparency when you start getting into like the details of projects. And I'm not saying that specifically to like our own projects, but just a generalized statement. I can fully agree with that and say we need blockchain to rebalance the level of transparency that industries like civil aviation, especially, there's a difference between civil aviation and defense. I think we could be more transparent, and it would serve us all well. It wouldn't just be a benefit for the flying public in terms of safety by having the increased transparency, but it would also be a benefit in terms of efficiency to all of these companies, because we have a lot of underutilized assets. And I think that's one of the main benefits, that using blockchain to add transparency to the condition and status of your assets, this is a hard thing for a lot of enterprises to accept. Okay. Even telling them to share like the serial number of a part could be hard for some people to accept. So yeah, that's how I would start to look at that.
And on the scalability of blockchain.
Yeah, I mean,
Why?
I know what you mean. I agree that. What do you think about like, for example, Algorand? I think that's a really seems to be a very promising one that we may do some work with, and I think some of the newer generation ones that are pure proof of stake have potential to scale, but I doubt that even those blockchains could handle like what we're doing. It's already hard. It's like already quite a. You're kind of. It feels like today still that you are running a little bit of a trade-off on performance compared to anything else that's out, like any of the non-blockchain solutions. So you better make it worthwhile why you're making this slight trade-off, and it can't be a big trade-off to use blockchain for your use case.
Yeah, I'm well. Not just the fact that technology is evolving, but also network topologies are evolving. So from the technical standpoint, I don't want to say that Ethereum is or the latter or the former versions of Ethereum are no longer up to date. And but we're talking about technologies like Hedera or DAGs that are highly performant, that are highly responsive, that are highly scalable. So definitely, let's call it, the first generation blockchains were not devised for massive sets of data, which is understandable. But as with everything, like 5G, we're now on the brink. I don't want to say brink of 6G, but we're now there's lots of research on 6G, and people sometimes don't even know what to do with so much data. So I think there's technology will be ahead of that let's call it challenge. And the thing is that I see that the biggest challenge is actually legacy. So because some stakeholders have adopted early versions of blockchain and want to keep them, and this was the case of Ethereum 1.0. Let's put it this way, and that lag or that wake actually is not an asset, it's actually a liability. So the way I see it
Yes.
is there's some new changes that will have to happen, but definitely the newer versions of blockchain are highly scalable. And
Won't it? It will
another
change quickly, won't it? And sorry, I want before we move off of that topic. That's
yeah,
something that if anybody from your, from Porto Business School, we are getting more into the public blockchains, and we need, we're going to be bringing to market a solution on the sustainability front for, as I mentioned, the aviation assets. We need to track the life cycle of the carbon footprint. So this is something we think we're well positioned to do. But I think communities like Porto Business School, if you guys want to participate in or offer any suggestions, I'm very open to hearing them. After this call
yes.
as well.
Uh, this is a great opportunity. We're presently working with multiple, not just business schools but technical schools. We're working with Imperial, with Technical, and essentially what we're doing is actually combining carbon accounting with blockchain. So this is a great opportunity for us to discuss uh, the different ways of not just accounting, but also managing the full life cycle traceability that is required for sustainable solutions. So it's we'll set up a call just after this on that theme, which leads us to
Awesome.
one of the last questions, which is actually your vision on the future as well as your vision of which is an interesting question, is what do you anticipate to be the growth of blockchain technology in the midterm? Where are the opportunities of blockchain?
So when I first started exploring blockchain, which for me was not until 2016, I was trying to think about how I was expecting it to emerge over time, and I didn't. I have to say I kind of thought there'd be like three. Like blockchain 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then Web3 and all these things, other words came around. But the way I see it is like it kind of starts out as first like the currency. That's like the first use case that really made it in blockchain. And then from there, you like evolve into intangible assets. And so then you have, Ethereum coming online, and you can start doing things like financial assets and derivatives of stock, essentially. And and then the third sort of evolution is like physical assets on a blockchain. And I think that is the place where we are at Block Aero. And I think it's where the NFT trend wanted to go and is just going. And people are finding better and smarter ways to do it now. So I think that is really what the next years are going to be about in the midterm, bringing the physical world more intelligently into blockchain technologies. And in the long run, I think once we get, like people have to start thinking more about the space economy. And I'm glad I heard the professor talk about the satellites and things. We're Block Aerospace, Block Aero. So I think once we start leaving the Earth and we have all the, we're going to start to need blockchain networks that can actually. I'd like to also know what the theoretical like kind of thoughts on this from the guys that do this kind of research. But like, I think you may need blockchains to like transact value, like where there's not going to necessarily be like the normal banking ways. So I could see it going into that, and I can see blockchain doing a better job and crypto doing a better job at actually making these moonshot ideas work. Getting better at vetting the quality of these tokenized initiatives.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to complement what you were saying, I think we're starting to live in an era of what I call planetary products, and blockchain is the technology that enables those planetary products. So the moment
Yeah.
Planetary communities decide on investing on certain projects, which can be interplanetary projects or it can be just Earth observation projects. This means that you could actually tap into investors that are not country dependent. They just want to invest on something that they believe in, and that's and I'm not just talking about impact investors. I'm really talking about any kind of investor that will tap into a blockchain or will tap into a community which has tokenized the investment, and that can convert that token into a benefit in the future as a way of investing. So these types of not just business models but actually models of investment will change dramatically industries as well as new products. So I think this is there's a great potential here. One final question
Especially in
is
Portugal.
yes, yes, and just to conclude, because we're completely off the hour, what are your long-term forecasts for the industry? And I would assume that it's for the aerospace industry. And how could you trigger a shift in opinion? How can you finally surpass these legacy systems?
I think it's, I had an investor from, one of our investor partners, Odyssey Ventures. And I like the way they describe what's kind of happening with Block Aero. It's like, landing a big airline group like we did is, Japan Airlines, very impressive. And it's like hard to do. And, I understand where that question is coming from. And trust me, it's a painful process, you could say, building a new enterprise like B2B type of company from scratch. And it's kind of like a crack in the dam. And we got that crack, and it's like a huge flow coming out, but it's like about to, you got to get a couple more cracks, and it kind of like maybe bursts
Then
or
it
unleashes.
just
It
the
could happen,
floodgates.
something like that.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your time, and thanks to all the participants and to all the questions from so many different directions, which were great. And thanks for you sharing your insights and your thoughts on not just the aerospace industry, but as well the impact of blockchain in aerospace. And as always, and with all the speakers and the CEOs that we've interviewed here, we always invite them to become mentors to some of the students that want to actually run a project on blockchain, in this case applied to aerospace industry. And it would be an honor to have you as a mentor on our mentored pool, and to actually mentor some of the students for blockchain development in aerospace. And with that, I'd like to thank again Todd for your time, and thank everyone for being here. And thanks for the team as well, because they've been always uh, on time with the slides and with all the with all the aspects of the presentation and the webinar. Thanks again. Thank you all, and see you guys. I think it's with Arturo Bridge from IMD School of Switzerland, and it's going to be on NFTs. So it's going to be another exciting and great webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Todd, and let's connect. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.